everyone, it is Miss Richmond again. We will be talking about World War II prior to the U.S. getting involved, which means we're going to be talking about the war from the lead up to it, the official start on September 1st, 1939, through about the end of 1941, so the first couple years of that war. If you remember from previous weeks, we talked about the build up to World War II and how countries across the globe had started to have this idea of appeasement and using this appeasement policy, which means that they are allowing other countries to act aggressively while ignoring it or only speaking out against it in an effort to avoid a major conflict. The dictators of those countries that were acting aggressively saw this as weakness by the Western powers, and they began to take more aggressive actions because the only consequence that was coming to them was verbal protest. So this is like your parents saying, like, no, don't do that, but if you do it, there's no real consequence. They just say, don't do it. Like, it's not good. And that's basically what the Western powers were doing at this point. Telling Germany, Italy, Japan, Spain, hey, don't do that. We don't like it. But there was no consequences. There are 4 countries that are going to be having acts of aggression or acting aggressively towards other countries during the 1930s that's going to really cause that lead up to World War II. Our first country is Japan. In 1931, Japan is going to seize Manchuria, which is a part of Northeast Asia. It's directly across from Japan. The Sea of Japan is the only thing that separates them. It's very easily accessible to Japan from their home archipelago. So Japan is going to take that land, which the League of Nations, that diplomatic body that formed from the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations is going to condemn them for that. They're going to say, like, you can't do this. You have to retreat, leave the Manchurians alone, go back to Japan. And the Japanese say, well, if I'm not a member of the League of Nations, there's not a whole lot you can do to me. So Japan decides that they're going to leave the League of Nations. The League of Nations is like, oh, well, what do we do now? He's not a part of the group. There's nothing that we can really do to him to make Japan listen. Japan is then going to start to overrun a lot of parts of eastern China, and in 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War is going to begin. This war starts in 1937 and it goes through the end of 1945 with the ending of the Second World War. The entire time, the Western powers are saying, you can't do this. Japan's like, I'm ignoring you. We're not listening. The Allied powers, those Western powers, America, Britain, France, are going to end up siding with the Chinese to help them out in fighting Japan during World War II. But Japan just ignores all of those protests that are being had about them acting aggressive. In 1935, Italy is going to have its act of aggression against Ethiopia. They're attacking Ethiopia out of spite because in the late 1800s, Italy suffered a major loss to Ethiopia, and they want to get a little bit of revenge and avenge themselves for that loss that they had. The king of Ethiopia is going to appeal to the League of Nations. He's going to say, like, hey, help us out here. We weren't doing anything. Italy's acting aggressively. Help us out. The League of Nations is going to file sanctions or penalties against Italy, but it doesn't really have any power to enforce them. So they lay out all of the penalties that'll happen to Italy, but that's it. Nothing happens. It would be similar to being like, all right, you have to go to jail for 30 years, but nobody knows how to get you to the jail. You can voluntarily go there and serve your sentence, or you can just ignore it and there's nothing we can really do about it. Because the League of Nations has no way to enforce those sanctions or penalties against Italy, Italy just ignores them and keeps going about what Italy was doing. Next up, we have Germany. Hitler has been testing the will of the Western democracies for years at this point. He finds them to be weak. He is building up his army. He is putting his military where it's not supposed to be. He's invading places. And those Western democracies are letting it happen because they view fascism, the form of government that Hitler and Mussolini from Italy are practicing, as a lesser evil to the government of communism that is in the Soviet Union. So they let him go unchecked. Hitler just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing to see just how far he can go, just how much he can get before somebody actually reacts. Our last country that has major acts of aggression during the 1930s is Spain. There is a man by the name of Francisco Franco. He's going to lead a revolt or a revolution, which leads into a civil war that starts in 1936. There are two groups. There's the nationalists, and those people are fascists. So they believe in the same type of government style as Hitler, and Franco is a fascist. The people that the fascists, they're known as nationalists, are fighting against are called loyalists. That's everybody else. That's people who want to have capitalism. That's people who think that democracy is cool. People who think that communism is the way to go. Everybody else is going to be lumped together in the loyalists. The Western powers don't get involved in what's going on in Spain at all. Once Franco wins the war, he starts a fascist dictatorship, and he models his government after those governments that Hitler and Mussolini have created in Germany and Italy, respectively. The Western democracies at this point in time feel that their job is just to keep the peace, let things roll. They don't want to cause another war like World War I. So they are going to denounce the acts of aggression by Japan, Italy, and Germany, but they aren't going to take any action. So they speak out publicly against those actions. They say that they think they're wrong or that they're evil, but that's as far as they go. France at this time has political divisions at home that they're trying to deal with. They know that they're not strong enough to defeat Germany alone, and that they need the help of Britain to do so. But at this point, Britain is suffering from the Great Depression, and they are not looking to fight anyone, let alone Germany and that major army that's being built. This is a common theme against those Western democracies. The Great Depression hit them hard, and it takes most of the energy that those countries and those governments have just to keep people afloat, to have food, to have shelter, to continue to exist. They don't have time to deal with fighting somebody. Because people are so drained, the wound of World War I is so new. This idea of pacifism starts to spread across Western countries. Pacifism is a belief that any violence, including war, is unjustifiable under any circumstances. Any dispute that you have can be settled through peaceful means. So, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about it, we're going to figure this out, but we are not going to fight one another. That's going to cause issues when Japan, Italy, Germany have no interest in doing things diplomatically, sitting down and figuring things out, and their policies are war. Here we can see the faces of the leaders of the countries that were acting aggressively during the 1930s. To the far left, we have Tojo Hideki, who is the Prime Minister of Japan in this time and during World War II. Next to him, we have Benito Mussolini, who is the dictator of Italy. Next to him on the right is Adolf Hitler, the dictator or Führer of Germany. And next to him is Francisco Franco, the fascist who led the revolts that led to the Civil War in Spain and became the dictator of Spain. Italy, Germany, and Japan are going to see the lack of reaction from the Western powers as weakness, and they are going to form an alliance that is known as the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo Axis, which is going to become shortened to the Axis powers, which is what they will be referred to during World War II. The three nations form this alliance. They're going to agree to fight the Soviet Union because they have communism there, and they also agree that they are not going to interfere with one another's plans for expansion. And this is going to clear the way for non-democratic countries to take bold steps. Germany is going to continue to have acts of aggression because nobody is checking them. So looking at the map that is on the right-hand side of your screen, if you look, the dark blue color is the Axis powers. So our Axis powers that are European-based are going to be Germany and Italy. The dark blue is their original borders. The land that gets occupied by them in the 1930s gets added on in this light blue color, which is Austria and the Sudetenland. But by the June of 1940, the Axis powers are going to take over a very large portion of Europe. They've taken over Norway and Poland and Czechoslovakia. They've taken over a good majority of France. This happens because they didn't check the Germans' aggression in the beginning. So then they were behind the ball. It was hard to overcome that, and Germany was able to continue to take power or take land even once the Allies began to react to these acts of aggression. Europe is going to plunge into war very quickly. Europe is going to move from peace to war very quickly. Germany is going to go back on a promise that they made, stating that they were not going to invade Czechoslovakia, but they decide after making that promise that they need the rest of that country to continue to expand the amount of land that they have available for Germans to live in. So they go in and they invade Czechoslovakia, they take that over. In August of the same year, Hitler decides to announce that he has formed a non-aggression pact with his known enemy, Joseph Stalin, who is the dictator of the Soviet Union. This is a non-aggression pact that becomes known as the Nazi-Soviet Pact. It is not based off of friendship or mutual respect, but this is formed out of the need of both countries. They agree that they're not going to fight one another. So we are not going to see Germany and the Soviets fight. They're going to divide up Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe so that one of their countries are in charge of that land. They agree to this because Hitler fears communism and Stalin fears fascism. They do not respect each other. However, Hitler doesn't want to have to fight the Western democracies and the Soviet Union at the same time. And Stalin hopes that by signing this non-aggression pact, it's going to keep him out of the war entirely. He doesn't really want anything to do with it. He sees it coming, but he wants to remain out of it. On September 1st of 1939, Germany is going to invade Poland. That is the act of aggression that pushes the Western powers over the edge. Everything up until this point, they just turned a blind eye to. On September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France are both going to declare war on Germany, and World War II has started. Once war is declared on Germany by the French and the British, Germany is going to be the one calling the shots and making the attacks for a good portion of the beginning of the war. When Germany invades Poland, they are going to reveal a new style of fighting that had not been used before. It's known as the Blitzkrieg or Lightning War. It used improved tanks. It had air power, so an air force to help lead strikes that were devastating to their enemies, because the Luftwaffe, or that German Air Force, could go out in front of the tanks and their army and start bombing airfields and factories and towns and cities and all of these places that would help support their enemy's army. They also had dive bombers in the Luftwaffe who would fly down low, and they would fire at the troops and they would fire at citizens alike, and that would cause the armies and those people to stay out and not want to fight the Germans. Germany and the Soviets had worked together to find a way to invade Poland most effectively. Germany is to the west of Poland, and they are going to invade Poland from the west. The Soviets are to the east of Poland, and they are going to invade from the east. This creates a circle around the Polish, and it forces them to surrender pretty quickly. Within 1 month, Poland doesn't exist anymore. The western part of what was Poland is now under German control. The eastern part of what was Poland is now under Soviet control. Because this happened so quickly, the British government and the French did not have time to actually do anything to prevent this. Hitler went in, they declared war, and before they could mobilize troops and get them to Poland to help them out, it was over. Poland had already been ripped apart and put under Soviet and German control. There's not a lot that happens during that winter. They weren't fighting very much. Hitler makes it through the winter okay. Stalin uses his winter to force the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to agree to allow the Soviet military to set up bases there. He's also going to take over part of Finland and force them to host military bases as well. So Hitler uses the winter to just regroup, and Stalin uses the winter to expand his army and set up military bases along these new borders that he is forming for the Soviet Union. Once the spring of 1940 gets going, the attacks are going to continue and they're going to come quickly. In April of 1940, Hitler is going to launch the Blitzkrieg against Norway and Denmark. He defeats both of those rivals very quickly. On May 2nd, Hitler then uses the Blitzkrieg to attack Belgium and the Netherlands, and both of those countries are going to be defeated, and having the land in Belgium and the Netherlands under German control gives Germany an advantage over the Allies, because up until this point, he did not share a border with those countries that he was directly fighting. So this gives him that border. On May 10th, 1940, Germany is going to launch a surprise attack against the Allies. This attack takes place in the Ardennes forest. Up until this point, this forest was thought to be impenetrable and a safe place for the Allies to be. They thought there's no way that Hitler's going to be able to get in here. There's no way that we can be attacked in this forest. This is a safe place for us. Hitler goes in and he proves them wrong. He forces them to retreat out and push back further into France. There is going to be a Allied retreat that is taking place through May 26th through June 4th of 1940. They are going to force the Allied forces to retreat all the way back to an area known as Dunkirk that is lined with beaches. At this point, the Germans think that they're going to be able to defeat them, take all of these people as prisoners and hostages because they've backed them up against water. However, the British Navy has called on all merchant, fishing, yachts, any sort of ship that is available to go to Dunkirk and help start evacuating the Allied armies out of that area of France. Once the Allied army is out of that area, Germans take control of it and start pushing further into France. Germany is allies with Italy, and on June 11th, 1940, Italy is going to declare war on France and begin attacking them from the south. This helps Hitler because now France is being attacked from two sides. On June 22nd of 1940, Hitler is going to force France to sign papers of surrender. At this point, once they surrender, Hitler is going to set up a puppet government in France and place the capital in Vichy. Now, the only French government is going to be outside of France. Technically, France is under the control of Germany at this point, and Hitler is taking a large amount of Europe under his control. Because Hitler has been so successful at taking over such a large part of Europe, he aims his sights on the British Isles and plans to take over control of Britain. So he is going to launch a campaign known as Operation Sea Lion in August of 1940. This gets started by Germany bombing British military targets in the south of Britain. That's not working out exactly as well as Hitler planned, so he is going to then instruct his Luftwaffe to begin to start bombing London and other cities and targeting citizens and using all means available to them to harm the British and the British government. On September 7th, Germany is going to launch what is known as the Blitz, which was 57 continuous nights of bombing of the city of London. His hope was that 57 continuous nights of bombing, just bombing you night after night after night, would wear the British down and force them to surrender. However, Parliament, their governing legislative body, continued to meet daily in order to help get funds and money to their army. And the king and queen showed that they had solidarity with the people of London by seeking out shelter in the bomb shelters in London with their common everyday people. The king and queen have land outside of the city that they could have easily evacuated to and spared themselves, but they wanted to show the people of London that they were a part of this and that they were doing what they could to try to make things better. The British are going to continue to fight, and it's going to help push back the Axis in North Africa and the Balkan states, but they're still getting bombed nightly in the British Isles. There's going to be a campaign between October of 1940 and the beginning of 1941 that Italy is going to lead. Their goal is to invade Greece. Germany is going to go in and back up Italy because they are part of the Axis powers. They have an alliance with one another. And by the beginning parts of 1941, both Greece and the country of Yugoslavia are going to be under control of the Axis powers. This just is more lands coming under control of those Axis powers, specifically under the control of Germany. And Germany is going to start really getting a sense of accomplishment and feeling like they're undefeatable, and they're going to start getting an arrogance about themselves that's going to start to cause issues for them. Hitler and the Nazis are going to have issues when they try to invade Britain due to the nature of it being islands off the coast of Europe. So they're going to turn their sights now on to the Soviet Union. If we remember, the Soviet Union and Hitler signed a non-aggression pact saying they weren't going to fight each other. But in June of 1941, Hitler decides, we're going to nullify that. We're just going to get rid of it. We're going to invade the Soviet Union in something known as Operation Barbarossa. Hitler is going to unleash a new blitzkrieg in the Soviet Union. He's going to work to take over control of the western parts of the USSR. He wants the raw materials, he wants the land, he wants all of those things to be under his control. And he says that the people of Germany are going to expand so greatly after this war that he needs Lebensraum, or more lands for his empire. Stalin and the USSR are caught off guard. They do not expect Germany to invade them. They're not fully prepared for a war with Germany, and they're not prepared for the extent of war that Germany has launched on them. Germany has launched that blitzkrieg, that very quick lightning-style warfare against the entire 1,800-mile border. 1,800 miles is basically the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. That is a very large amount of space to try to defend. The German soldiers had seen a lot of battle action at this point. They're skilled at war. They understand how mobile warfare works, and they had that advantage over the Soviets. Within 1 week, Germany has forced the advance inward of the Soviet Union by 200 miles. They're going to destroy 4,000 aircraft. They're going to kill, capture, or wound 600,000 Soviet army troops in just 1 week. So in 1 week, Hitler is able to take over quite a bit of space, kill a lot of Russian men. But the thing that helps out the Russians the most is that Hitler chooses to attack leading into winter. Russian winters are brutal. They're incredibly cold. There's lots of snow, and the technology that the Germans have been using don't work during those conditions. The German soldiers also aren't used to being out in such conditions where the Russians are used to it. They use the fact that they're used to and accustomed to that type of weather to their advantage. They attack the Nazis at this point. The Nazis are spread thin. A lot of them are freezing to death. And the Operation Barbarossa is going to end because winter happens. Hitler had planned to invade the Soviet Union before winter got there, but winter came early and it put an end to it. At the end of Operation Barbarossa, Germany had suffered 775,000 casualties. The Soviets had suffered around 800,000 casualties, and another 6 million of their men had been taken prisoner. It was a very quick campaign due to winter coming, but it was also a very deadly campaign. While the Operation Barbarossa was taking place, the Germans had also been laying siege on the city of Leningrad. It was a 2.5-year siege of that city. Food was incredibly short supply. Rations for most people were just 2 slices of bread a day. Nothing on that bread, nothing to go with the bread, just 2 slices of bread. Some people had resorted to eating anything they could get their hands on. One thing that people were doing to try and feed themselves was peeling wallpaper off their walls and boiling it, and then drinking the water that was left from that, because it was said that the glue that was used to hold the wallpaper on included potato flour. So they were trying to get those nutrients and that feeling from the potato flour that was in glue. This siege is going to last 2.5 years. Millions of people who live in Leningrad were going to die, but they were able to hold off the Nazis for that entire time. Stalin is going to urge Britain to open up a front on the western side to fight Germany so that they have to split and it can offer them some relief. But Britain isn't going to open up a front, but they do agree to help out the Russians and work together for the remainder of the war to stop the Germans. This is a major changing point in the war, because up until this point, Russia was remaining neutral. They were staying out of the war. Germany wasn't getting what they wanted, so then they decided to attack the people that they signed an agreement with, saying that they weren't going to attack them, which then turned the Russians against the Germans even more. And this is a major turning point. The United States is going to come into the war soon with soldiers who have not seen years of battle, which are going to help significantly, and we will talk more about that next week.